diagnosis as PTSD,
which we're not able to address because we haven't gone to the root cause.
If you make the diagnosis, what do?
If we let that go on for years and years and years, manifesting at a huge height, then the damage will be far more extensive.
And if you were to put that next to the signs and symptoms for some of the mental health issues that we've been discussing, PTSD, for example, they're virtually identical.
It's only recently, I think, that at the MOD, people have started to think, well, actually, maybe some people who've been diagnosed with PTSD are actually people who've had brain injuries.
So, I mean, this is deep science for which you need to do the appropriate sort of studies, and that's not something that the MOD's got the capacity to do in terms of that type of deep science.
Vital parts of the science have been left out. So the narrative of this report got changed. I sent numerous emails to Imperial raising my concerns. Equally, I sent emails to Defence Medical Services about this report. The corrections sent by eminent speakers who presented on the day, who were leading on the science, who sent their corrections through, were ignored.
Did you know that psychiatrists are the only medical specialists that virtually never look at the organ they treat?
What is often missed is the underlying additional diagnosis of mild traumatic brain injury.
An ugly subject right now, but the neurotoxicity as well. People who took Mefloquine, Lariam, who are having the adverse effects of this, horrific adverse effects from this drug.
I do find it quite difficult sometimes advising the use of Mefloquine quite so widely.
Whenever I've needed anti-malarial drugs, I said I'll take anything, I'm not taking Lariam.
Or could it be because the studies were fundamentally flawed, biased, inherently deeply flawed, and were not designed to reliably and validly assess that adverse effect?
Many of the studies that allege that the neuropsychiatric consequences of Mefloquine are very rare really are done from data sets that are very, very weak.
Come to my conclusion straight away is that this is a very dangerous drug. It's uniquely dangerous to soldiers. It is mind-altering and mood-changing and also causes severely disrupted sleep.
And also Lariam. It is a anti-malarial that has been found to incite people to be homicidal and suicidal. So I go overseas, and thankfully when I was in California before I nearly got Lariam, a woman at the Orange County Health Department, a doctor, Indian doctor, she was kind enough to warn me. She said, these will be very heavy and toxic on your liver and your kidneys, and I don't advise you to take them. Well, later did I find out people were becoming homicidal and suicidal under the influence of this anti-malarial. I think a mosquito net will work just fine for me.
And I think if that had been unrecognised and untreated, frankly, who knows where it would have gone. And there are other cases whereby the symptoms that people exhibit as a result of taking Lariam, or probably having taken Lariam, can have pretty catastrophic effects.
Have you ever taken Lariam?
No.
That's even more the case in the armed forces, where people want to show perhaps that they're tough and that that they can carry on.
I still can't believe we have so many people that come and willingly get malaria to advance what we do for our warfighters.
They were looking at trying the chloroquine on defence personnel.
Fortunately, we have people who are willing to do it.
Defence have a tendency to use large dosages on the veterans, and they don't follow up with long-term side effects. Still to this date, 20 years on, Defence has not been in contact with me in regards to any of the side effects or any of the other fellow veterans.
In a statement, the MOD said they prescribe Lariam based on expert medical advice from Public Health England. They go on to say the drug is used across the UK, not just by the military, and there is no defined caveat from any advisory body in the world that suggests its use should be restricted in military personnel.
Go and prove that it's a good drug, but my findings were the opposite.
Most of the studies that have been cited in defense of the safety of Mefloquine and tafenoquine have been deeply flawed to the extent that they have not been informed by methods of modern psychiatric epidemiology.
When you get to see the data, what you see is that in some cases, the patients don't always exist. The handy thing about patients who don't exist is that they can't die on treatment and they can't be injured by the treatment either.
General Dannett made up his own mind that the anti-malarial was not safe to take, but he admits he put the issue on a back burner when he was in the top job. You knew you wouldn't take Lariam at the same time as members who were serving under you as Chief of General Staff were taking Lariam.
Yes, that is true.
I would bet a bottom dollar that a large percentage, a very large percentage of the veterans who are sleeping on the streets of Westminster and London and so on, around, and for that matter around the country, are people who've had a significant brain injury at some point in their life and haven't had the proper support and treatment that they required.
How would you ever know what to do for them unless you actually looked? Treatment needs to be tailored to individual brains, not clusters of symptoms.
One has to ask the right questions and use validated instruments to determine if psychiatric symptoms are present in individuals who are taking these drugs.
The other thing here that we have is psychiatry versus neurology. So for years and years and years, these departments, psychiatry has led on all of this, when actually this isn't psychiatry, this is neurology.
Researchers have found that undiagnosed brain injuries are a major cause of homelessness, drug and alcohol abuse, depression, panic attacks, ADHD, and suicide. We are in for a pending disaster with the hundreds of thousands of soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and virtually no one is looking at the function of their brain. We are in for a pending disaster with the hundreds of thousands of soldiers coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and virtually no one is looking at the function of their brain.
Successfully be educated to avoid this potential misdirection of diagnosis.
And for the most part, the entire body of literature on the adverse effects of these drugs have not been informed by specific knowledge in this area.
Ghostwriters who are working to a pharmaceutical company brief so that the articles include the commercial messages that the pharmaceutical company wants in there. Neither the ghosts, nor the academics, nor the regulators, nor the guideline makers get to see the data behind the claims being made, the data from the clinical trials. No one gets to see it.
And as a result of that, this report got written into a different narrative. As a result of speaking out, obviously, that has not gone down well. And the report is now published. It's on the Imperial website, but it actually fails to report on the accurate science that was reported on the day.
But the medical journals these days are too scared to publish reports like this.
These individuals, I believe afterwards, were telephoned by Defence Medical Services Department, and they were persuaded to put their names on the report. One individual was actually told that they know that perhaps it does not reflect the day, and that they're not going to take the recommendations forward in this report. And, but we would really like you to put your name on it anyway, but we just want you to know that we're not going to take the recommendations forward in this report.
Then they're getting entirely the wrong treatment.
Our imaging work also taught us that mild traumatic brain injury was a major cause of psychiatric illness that ruined people's lives, and virtually no one knew about it because they would see psychiatrists for things like temper problems, anxiety, depression, and insomnia, and they would never look, so they would never know.
So these universities have led on research for the military for years and years and years, and they've received massive amount of money for doing that. And in doing that, today's research is tomorrow's services, so they dominate what gets delivered.
The Ministry of Defence as an organisation, we're still trying to come to a conclusion in general terms whether the beneficial or harmful effects of Lariam were greater or less.
Dave, when was the MOD first with the European Medicines Agency? Oh my God. Dave, I have no idea.
It is imperative that the recommendations made in the APPG's Time for Change report are implemented without delay.
Concerns were raised many years ago about Lariam? Was there negligence in the way it was prescribed?
We have thousands of men, women who fought for this country, who are willing to give their life, and we're very, very lucky to have got them back. And if we keep reporting the wrong narrative just because of individuals' vested interests, then I'm afraid then that has to be exposed, and that's why I've agreed to speak today.
Brain injuries that puts them at the greatest risk of a fatal outcome. The Time for Change report rightly calls for a national review of neurorehabilitation to ensure service provision is adequate.
And our job as parliamentarians is to bring that change to individuals through brightening their prospects.
I've read some communications which has come back to us from the Medical Defence Services on what they intend to do, which then would kick this into the long grass. And there is a term for that. We call it sanctuary trauma, and that is pushing people further into their trauma towards suicide. And we are changing the narrative to what it needs to read, the correct writing on the wall that represents the science, which is the evidence.